When I was a kid, I talked like a kid, I thought like a kid, I reasoned like a kid, I did kid stuff until I was 6, and I still did kid stuff, but that's when death came. And before then, the only questions that I really even thought of were surrounding my present circumstances. So, when's dinner? Why can't we stay longer? When will we be there? How long do I have to sit in timeout? Who wants to play with me? Where's Waldo? But when death came, so did new questions. Why did Dad have to die? God, do you hate me? How do I get to him as soon as possible? How could you allow something like this to happen? And when you think about all those questions, most of them, even today, I still don't even have answers for. And as a kid into my early teens, those answers were what I lived for. My dad's death took me to some really dark places. It's not often a 6-year-old is asking, God, do you hate me? Death abruptly threw me into reality, and I didn't like that. I was confused. I was lonely. So I did what most of us have done or do. I took all my questions and my anger and my loneliness and my doubt, and I put it into a little suitcase, and I went on a journey. And I had no idea that joy lay ahead, but it did. And on that journey, I found 2 things in this order. The first thing was music, specifically songwriting. I would sit in my room for hours and just write lyrics to songs that didn't have any instrumentation to them, mostly in the style of Michael Bolton. My mom really liked him. And things really got better when I got my first boombox. I graduated. I got a chance to make my own musical choices, and as you can imagine, I chose Sarah McLachlan. So I guess I was always destined for that adult contemporary soft rock thing. I don't know. Either way, I wrote all the time, and as I got into middle school and playing piano, I learned how to play guitar, and I never cared about, and I still don't really, gear or shredding or any of those things. I just learned guitar because I wanted to write music. And it sounds a bit trite, but I see now how helpful those times of being alone, whether as a kid or even as an adult, how helpful they were for me and still are in that grieving process. The second thing I found was a father, and of all places, at my dad's grave. He gave me something that day I didn't have before. New eyes. New eyes to see that the life I was living was killing me. All the toiling for answers, the anger, the isolation. But the life God was offering embraced the grief I was suppressing and showed me I was okay to feel pain. My pain mattered to God, and so did my questions. I sobbed that day at my dad's grave, bitterly. But when I look back, I don't feel bitter. When I look back on that day, I feel joy because I know my whole story shifted on that day to a redemption story. And the redemption is that before God, my life was consumed with running from grief. But when God embraced me as his child, I didn't have to be so afraid of it. I was okay to feel and know that God, my Father, wasn't annoyed with my tears. And now that I'm older, I see that so many of the songs I've written are actually really tied to that experience on that day, the death in the life. It's a different story than I ever could have imagined, but it's better. And so for the last however many years, I've been trying my best to tell that story through the songs I write. A few years ago, I started to realize that my creative process was all wrong, which is probably true for a lot of us. We change like every month. But I had this idea that my songwriting had to be compartmentalized. So there was the citizens song category, and then there was the solo song category, and then there was this church songs category that I didn't necessarily want my name to be associated with, but maybe someone else would want to play those songs. And then there was the song category for the 25 bands I still haven't ever started. And writing, it was a roadblock after roadblock, and I started to see a trend that really frustrated me. Then one day I'm walking around in my living room and I'm working on a song for Citizens called Relent. And I'm also thinking about my daughter, who at that time kept coming up to our room often in the middle of the night because she was telling us that she was seeing monsters in her room. And so I'm pretty stuck on this other song. I'm not getting anywhere, and I start playing a chord, and I really like it. And then I start singing this melody, and I sing a lyric, and I sing "Monsters Creep Into My Room." And then for the next 2 hours, I just wrote a song for my daughter about a place that we could escape to get away from the monsters. When the song was finished, I realized what had happened, and those new eyes, even in this way too, in the creative sense, my eyes got wider and bigger. For one, somehow I'd just written a song within a song, like two songs that seemed completely different from one another, yet had a lot more similarities than I realized. And two, I had fun. Fear can keep us from telling our stories as it is, and it's definitely been true for me a lot. And when I look back on the process of writing that song about the monsters, it was fun. I was happy, but it also brings me a lot of joy to know that I was just telling a story and wasn't thinking about what other people thought of that story. That experience, it caused me to stop compartmentalizing the process and to use a cliche, just let it flow. I learned a valuable lesson that day as an artist, at least for me. I need to tell my story as it is. The death, my dad dying when I'm 6, and spending the majority of my life processing through the grief, mostly even today, still through art and life, things like God and my family and my friends and imagination and so many different things that God's given us that bring life. Telling my story meant doing it without rules or fear. And probably like you, my favorite artists, they're honest, and it was time that I was too. And honesty, it does something to you, and it does something to me. And as a songwriter, I find that the more honest I am, the more confident the listener, whoever that might be, they are to open up, and maybe in a similar way. And I'll give you an example. I put out a solo record last year for a couple reasons, but actually one of the main reasons I did it is I just wanted to be around other people, musicians and artists, whether in Seattle or around the country, that might not know God. And so recently I was playing a solo show, and I finished the set, and I'm leaving the stage, and I'm about to walk outside after the set, and the bouncer, he stops me, and he says, "Hey, are you the guy that was just up on stage?" I'm like, oh my gosh, what did I do? Like, I didn't have a bracelet on or like a stamp or something. I thought I was getting kicked out of the show I just played or something. And so I just kind of answer him, "Yes, yeah, I am." He said, you're the guy that was just on stage. I'm like, goodness, man, yes, I am. And then he holds out his hand for me to shake it, and he looks at me and he just says, "Thank you. You have no idea how much those songs you were just singing meant to me. I've had a really hard day." And there we are. I don't even know this guy. I've never met him before, and he's also a bouncer. And we're holding hands, and and he starts crying, sobbing. And I was completely caught off guard. And then I started thinking about it more. It's actually not that surprising. I didn't I didn't mention God. I just told my story, but I sang about a love and marriage that's been formed based on my experiences of God loving me. And we tell stories as artists, as people, and then it speaks to other people. And it brings me joy to know that your story and my story, our vulnerability, our honesty is not wasted. When I write, I have to think bigger than this song is only for Christians, and instead, this song is for anybody. There's no rules. We Christians sometimes need everything to be tidy and buttoned up. But that's not any one of our stories, is it? It's not. I tend to think it's because we often skip the cross and go straight to the resurrection as if we're already there. Check out my Instagram feed and my perfect life. It's a party all the time, right? When in reality, only Jesus has experienced the fullness of new life. We've just tasted, and it's been good, right? But we've just tasted. There's something better. My story, a lot like many of yours, is a lamenting story. The evangelical church is afraid of that, but God is not. Nor is he ashamed. Even still, it honestly gives me joy to tell my story because despite all the sadness, it's still good news. And maybe it's weird, but I enjoy telling a sad story because I know there's hope at the end. Last year, Citizens put out a new record called A Mirror Dimly, and one of the songs from that record is called My Joy is Complete, and it was inspired and very heavily influenced by Psalm 4. And one of the really interesting things about the Psalms is that over half of them are written by David, and they give us a window into David's heart and soul that the historical accounts and Samuel just don't provide us with. They show us how David felt and that God is okay with that. Listen. Answer me when I call, O God of my righteousness. You have given me relief when I was in distress. You have given. All I need to do is look back at my story and remember, you've delivered me time and time again. And then he goes on in response to his oppressors, the ones who want to destroy him. He says to God, you've put more joy in my heart than they have when their grain and their wine and their treasures abound. In peace I will both lie down and sleep, for you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. David sings the story from his soul. God is my joy. I'll be okay. It's not the whole story, though. There are many Psalms that tell a much different story, but when you piece all these little stories together, you start to see a theme. You see a person that has found joy against a lot of odds, not unlike any one of us. God writes redemption and tells David, you're mine. I love you. I'll defend you. I'll protect you. I'm with you. And David sings about it. God writes redemption in your life, and he's written it, and he's still writing it. Will we tell our story? Will we give others a window into who we really are? You know, truth be told, joy comes in many ways, and you know that. This is just a part of my story. It's not the whole story. Opportunities for joy exist all around me, not just exclusive to what I make. At the same time, I want the songs I write to matter and mean something to the people I share them with. You do too. You want the art that you make, the things that you create to matter. We're all so different as artists, right? And that's a good thing. That's a wonderful thing. But here's where we are the same. All of us in this room have a story. Your story may be that your daughter was recently diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumor and she's been given a year to live. Your story may be that up until this point, life's been pretty good and nothing bad has really happened. And that's totally fine. That's not bad. That's good. Your story might be like mine, where you lost a parent, or maybe you never knew either of your parents. No matter what, here's the point. None of our stories are unredeemable. To quote my buddy Alex early, through the gospel, we receive a second childhood. In Christ, a better story is being written, and just as Jesus didn't come to end the law, but to fulfill it, he did not come to end your story, but to fulfill it. In Christ, Son of God. In Christ, daughter of God. In Christ, kid of grace. Your joy, my joy, is complete. Thank you.